Today, we're going to have a conversation about voting machines. I'm Tammy Patrick. I'm the Chief Program Officer with the National Association of Election Officials, commonly known as Election Center. And I'm joined today by someone I have known for almost 20 years, you could believe that, Pam Smith.
Hi, Tammy. I'm Pam Smith. I'm President and CEO of Verified Voting. Our mission is to strengthen democracy for all voters by promoting the responsible use of technology in elections. So it's good that we're talking about that here. We were first started in 2004 by technologists, and we advocate for the kinds of things that make elections trustworthy.
Yeah, I think we actually met in 2007. We were both testifying in Congress on the importance of election audits. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, let's dig into some real general concepts about what are voting machines and why do we even use them. So could you help us understand by laying out some of the most common types of voting machines that people will see or encounter when they go to the polls to vote, and what exactly that type of voting machine does?
Yes, it's true. There are many different kinds of technology in elections. And even before you get to the voting machine, there might be a machine that checks you in so that you can vote. Electronic poll books are being used instead of paper poll books in the majority of the country now. So you're likely to see that machine first. But once you go to vote, you will be given one of three kinds of opportunities to vote, depending on where you live. The majority of the country will get a plain paper ballot that they can fill out by hand. And when they finish filling it out, it will be counted by a scanner, sometimes called a tabulator. So it scans the ballot, looks for the marks on the ballot that you've just made, and then it totals up the number of votes for the different candidates that you choose. So that's the most commonly used. That's close to 70% of the country has that. You'll also find a ballot marking device, and this is an electronic interface that lets you use something like a touch screen to choose your candidates and choices. And at the end of that process, it prints out a ballot on paper that you can also check before it gets counted by a scanner. So you will see either a plain paper ballot or a ballot marking device in most of the country. In about 5%, less than 5% now of the country, there are direct recording electronic voting machines. And these, we call them DREs. These are machines that not only let you mark through an interface, but they also do the tabulation right inside the same machine. So it's not only marking your choices, but it's saving those choices as an electronic form of the ballot. And most of those do also have a paper printout that you can check. Only one state is currently using machines that don't have any kind of a paper trail printout for voters to check.
And I think that you highlight so many important facets there. One is that use of a paper ballot. So 20 years ago when we first met, it was not the case that the vast majority, almost everyone, voted on a piece of paper, and that's certainly the case now. So what do you feel is sort of the most important thing for people to know about how voting machines work?
So voting machines are computers, basically, right? They're programmed to do certain functions, including counting, adding up all the vote totals, and so on. What's most important for voters is to know that that paper ballot is their ballot. And that's going to be really important, not just for them to check and make sure that it says what they wanted it to say, but also it becomes important for election officials. It's what gets counted, and it's what gets recounted or checked in a post-election check on the accuracy of the vote count. By themselves, it's just a dumb machine, right? It requires programming. It's not inherently evil or inherently good, but that's why we have the paper, because that's what makes it possible to safeguard the count and make sure it's right. And there's so many different kinds of machines, and some people think, well, maybe if there's machines doing all this stuff, what do we need the humans for? But the humans are a very important part of elections. Tammy, talk about what the human election workers are there to do in the polling place.
You're absolutely right, Pam, and it is interesting because the organization where I currently am employed, is the National Association. We have more than 2,300 election professionals all across the country, and they literally hire thousands, if not tens of thousands, of part-time workers, staff to put on an election, and then you have literally hundreds of thousands of poll workers. So an election is really a community coming together to make sure that they're able to record what the community wants moving forward from their local, state, and federal government, both in offices as well as some policies. And so the election officials and the poll workers and the staff that are there to make sure that the system is safe, it's secure, it's accurate, and it's accessible. And all of those things are equally important. Not one thing takes precedence over another, because without access, you don't have voters able to record how they feel on a particular item or event. Without security, you can't have total confidence in what the outcome is. So it's really important that not only we have election professionals conducting the election, but that they are being conducted transparently. So in every state, there is some level of observation that can occur. Now, who is eligible to observe, what they are eligible to observe, and when they are eligible to observe it varies across the patchwork of election policies in this country. But there is a transparency thread that runs throughout our election process to make sure that we have bipartisan teams that are programming the equipment, that are testing the equipment, that are making sure that, in fact, the machines are working accurately, and then following up after the election to make sure that there are audits that are being done that absolutely take into account the human element. What's important for people to understand as voters is that there are instructions on how to mark a ballot, how to interface with the voting machines, and it's important that they read those. As a species, we don't usually like to read instructions, but you want to make sure that you're following the instructions to make sure that the machine knows what you want and how you want to record your vote. The people are there to help you. If you have questions, they're there to assist. In fact, there are federal laws that allow for certain types of assistance. So it's important for people to, not be afraid of this process, to not be worried about if they're going to make a mark that's incorrect. In every state, if you make an error, you can rectify it. You can spoil that ballot and get another ballot. You can have a second chance. In fact, second chance voting is part of federal law.
That's so important. And you talk about the humans and the work that they do. And honestly, they are the heroes of democracy because they're the ones that make all this run. I think a lot of people think about elections as just election day, maybe early voting and election day. But there are things that election officials do before the election. It doesn't just magically have a ballot that appears into the machine. Someone has to program that. What else do they do to make sure that the equipment is working on election day?
My first job in elections back in 1998 was testing voting systems, doing what's called a logic and accuracy test, marking a set of ballots in a specific way and running them through every piece of machinery that was going to be used in a primary election or a general election. It's done for every election that the machine is used. And that machine is then tested through logic and accuracy tests, often referred to as LNA, to make sure that the marks that were predetermined, are exactly what comes out of the machine after the ballots are run through. It's sort of like when we used to have checkbooks and balancing your account to make sure that everything is correct and that all of the numbers line up correctly. Then what happens, because those machines now have had some test ballots run through them, everything is zeroed out. Now, when those machines are sent to the polling place or they are turned on to centrally count vote by mail or absentee ballots, there is a results tape that is run. And that result tape is often referred to as the zero tape, because we want to make sure that any of the test results were cleared from the machine before any actual votes are cast on the machine. And that is something that is done under observation of political parties, by bipartisan poll worker teams. And it's just one other way to make sure that no one has tampered or inserted any sort of influence into that machine between the time in which it was tested and when the polls are opened to capture those official votes.
And they can always ask. They can always reach out to the state or their county. At our website, we have a map that shows information for how to contact your local election official and your state election official for every state. And you'll visit that map when you're looking to see what kind of voting system is in use, if you like. But that information is also at your county office website or at the state website. But I think it's important for people to know that someone is checking to make sure all the candidates that are supposed to be voted on in this election are on that ballot. That programming takes place well in advance. And that's why we do those pre-election tests to make sure everything, every position, every possible combination is working right.
Pam, you bring a really important point up, and that is in the testing process, in the auditing process, more often than not, if there is an error that is found or a problem, it stems from human error. There are errors that can occur because we are human beings doing human work with sometimes limited resources and long hours. So errors do occur, and that's why the process of checking before the election happens is so critical to make sure that the proofing of the information is correct and that the programming of the information was done properly.
And I think that's why that paper trail is so important as part of the process. The voter has the chance to do a final double check, right? The voter gets to say, I really want to vote for Tammy Patrick for president. Wait a minute, why don't I see her name on here? The voter gets a chance to confirm that they marked all their choices correctly and the way that they wanted to. And they do have that second chance if for some reason it didn't come out the way that they expected. I think it's important for voters to know that there are practical steps that they can take to safeguard their own vote. One of those steps is to, first of all, make sure you know whether there's a registration deadline in your state, and make sure you check your registration using the county website, the state website, any one of a number of websites are available to you for checking your registration. All you have to do is Google it and check your registration, make sure it's still up to date. If not, you contact your county office so that they can correct anything that's wrong in time for you to participate.
It's so important for voters to understand what their options are, both in registration and in voting, and realize that it may not be the same as the next state over. So we've talked about voter registration materials and the different machines that are used, whether it's an electronic poll book or online voter registration. So Pam, what else would you say to someone who's still skeptical about voting machines, maybe even after the ballots have been hand counted and audited?
First of all, I would say to every voter, the one way to be sure your vote won't count is not to show up. So go vote for sure. They're just machines and they are programmed by humans. All of these steps we've talked about are important steps to take to safeguard the technology that we use. But at the end of the day, we have those physical ballots to rely on. I think one thing that really helps people understand elections better is signing up to be a poll worker. Election officials always need poll workers. And if you sign up to participate in that way, you get to see elections sort of from the inside out. The training will show you a lot of information. You'll be helping other voters, and you'll see answers to many of your questions just by being part of that process.
So I think that this has been, I knew this was going to be a great conversation, Pam. I always learn so much from you. And the resource that you mentioned about the map is incredible. So people should go out, take a look at it. If they have other questions, they should definitely reach out to their state and local election officials, see if there's a tour of the facility, join on, like you mentioned, of being a poll worker, get involved. Nothing is more important than the power that the voters have at the polls. And in this moment, don't abdicate your power. Make sure that you're wielding it and doing so in an informed way. So, Pam, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
No, I think this has been great. Voters, go vote, participate, safeguard your vote in all the ways. Support your election officials, because what they do is very important, and it's not an easy job. If it were, everyone would do it. Election officials are really safeguarding our democracy. So make sure you support them, thank them for their work, and be nice to your poll workers.